Okay, welcome everybody. We've got people rolling in as we hit 5:30, which is good. Before we begin, I'll undertake an acknowledgement of country, which is traditional in Australia for our overseas visitors. So I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, which was never ceded, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and we thank those elders for sharing their deep knowledge of country with our profession. So I'm very pleased today to have two eminent British architects presenting their commended work in the affordable housing sector, and I'd invite both at the start of their lecture to say a little bit about themselves and their practice, and then move on to projects. So firstly, a recent visitor to our shores, Robert Sekula of Ash Sekula, a highly awarded practice in London. So Robert, over to you.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I've got a bit of a cough, so I hope my voice lasts all through this. But thank you for having me, and it's great to be sort of being transcontinental. So I'm going to. Can I share the screen? Let's see. There we go. Share. So hopefully you can see a thing saying Ash Sekula Architects there.
We've got that. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about a number of projects that we've done over the last 20 or so years. And as well as being sort of roughly chronological, I'm also going to go from kind of pretty small, 3 units, up to 700 units. And so there's going to be a whole range of stuff. It's going to be in a lot of different places as well. Some of it is in inner cities, some of it is in quite rural locations, but all of it has the common theme that that there is it is either affordable housing or there is some affordable housing in it. So I'm not probably going to show too many, have too many words. I'm mainly going to show you pictures, but I just want to start, sorry, with a few words, just to say that what I'm aiming to focus on in this talk is users and how they experience our architecture. So all architects need clients, and clients are important and so on. But what we try to do is to actually think, what is it that the people who are going to use our buildings and live in our buildings, what do they actually need? And that for us actually is sort of more at the front of our minds than some of the requirements of the brief necessarily. The other thing I want to talk about is, or focus on, is, you know, the way early modernists talked about space, you know, magnificent spaces of architecture, wonderful masses under the light, all this kind of this sculptural stuff about architecture, which I'm very into, and I like sculptural architecture. But what is more important for us is community and conviviality. It's about what it's like to live in the place, how the place can help people come together in a neighborly, and this word we like very much, convivial way. And the other thing is, we find a lot of architects get off a little bit on repetition. They create an object or a bay, and then they repeat it ad infinitum. They say, right, well, I've got my perfect solution, so let's just bring it out. What we're more interested in that is actually looking at the site and looking at different parts of the site and trying to find an architecture that responds to the particular opportunities that are on any particular site. And what that leads to is that rather than a kind of rather boring rhythm to our architecture, it leads to a kind of syncopation, which is a kind of music term, but it means that you could say that our architecture is all over the place, but that's not quite how I'd put it. Although I just have. Anyway, let's start. I'm going to start with a project that we won in competition about 20 years ago for a large housing provider in London called Peabody. And this competition was called Fresh Ideas for Low-Cost Home Ownership. And they had 3 sites, which you can see here. Now, in the end, only the purple one in the middle was built, and that's the one I'm going to show you. But what we did is, for the 3 sites, we developed this kind of module. Having talked about not going for repetition, here I am showing you a repeating module to start with. But we designed this module which kind of tapers to one end, and the reason why was because 2 of these sites were acute angled triangles, and as a result of that, it meant that by doing it in this way, we could fit the objects more into the corners of the sites. We could make better use of those very acute angles. So this is what our little site here, 4 units, looked like, and they'd asked for fresh ideas, and so we gave them 2 different sorts of fresh ideas. One is, we thought a lot about materials, and we were very interested in that time in building in lightweight materials, which seemed to us to keep transport costs down. It's timber frame, so it was sustainable, and so on. And we clad the buildings in 2 things. One was a kind of silvery foil, which you can see sort of reflecting kind of pink and purple there. And the other was a more mechanical kind of protection to that foil, which was some GRP cladding, which extends up past the eaves and kind of notionally disappears into the sky. And against that kind of, if you like, that kind of quite hard metallic plastic kind of quality of the main building, we set a kind of a much more rustic type of architecture for the access ways and the little balconies that we created, which are more kind of based on rural fencing and that kind of thing. This is it on the front elevation, the street elevation, where we used a different color GRP and ran it horizontally. And the other way in which we if you like, try to be, it's not that we were trying to be radical, but we were thinking hard about what is the best way to use the spaces in a minimum size flat. And so this is a 2-person flat, and it's about 70 square meters, which is a minimum size. And what we did is we reversed almost all the spatial priorities which are usually connected with flats like this. So, for example, the living room, which is here, is made very, very small, and the kitchen is made as large as we possibly can make it. Because one of the things we've discovered is that the kitchens are where people spend most of their time, and living rooms tend to be places which they use occasionally, you know, for entertaining and so on. So this works very well for watching television, for talking to each other, for smoking, for listening to music, and for putting up guests as a kind of, we actually wanted originally to make this into a kind of ship's cabin where the couches turn into bunks, but that didn't happen in the end. And so that was one way in which we reversed priorities. We made the bedrooms tiny. They have just room for a bed, but all the clothes storage is in the hallway, where there's a lot more room. And we made the hallway, instead of just being a passage which connects the different rooms, we made it a space in its own right, where you can have a desk, where you can park a bicycle or a pram, where children can play, and so on. And the last thing we did was to make the bathroom here and the toilet here 2 separate rooms, so that at the sort of rush hour in the morning, there are 2 different places to wash. We gave them both a window, and we made them both relatively large. So all those things were actually taking spaces away from the spaces you normally give space to and giving them to other spaces which we thought was more critical. And one last point, instead of making the balcony here at the far end of the flat, out through that door, we put it at the front of the flat, and this is the front door, so that when you're on your balcony, you're actually in your front garden rather than your back garden, and that was intended to make the place more convivial. So this is a view of the one of the front doors at that large hallway space, and you can see the balcony beyond. And here's a close-up view of the cladding. We worked with an artist who ran these twisted electrical wires down the interstices between them, and it means you get this lovely parallax effect as you walk around the building. So it's interesting when you're an architect, okay, you get things published and we won awards for this project and so on. You don't often get fan letters from the people you design it for. So we were very pleased, and for many years we had this picture up in our office, which was a painting which the first family that moved into this place did with their kids. And you can see at the bottom of the painting, it says, "Thank you for our incredible home." So that was kind of, for us, very, very heartwarming. So I'm now going to show you another scheme with 4 houses in it. It was on a tiny site in what was called at that time an eco town, which was trying to actually break the mold of house building and get development done in a more ecological way. And we won this competition with these 4 houses. 3 of them are for human beings, and the last one on the right-hand side is for birds and for bats, but it's also for dustbins. So we took advantage of this requirement to be biodiverse and create habitats and so on, to give ourselves a 4th little house on the corner of the site. This was one of the drawings we did at competition. And I think one of the things that they liked about what we were showing them was that we were showing them the life lived within the house. We were showing them how you dry clothes, where you do homework. This is what the houses looked like when they were built. And we, again, syncopation. We'd use 3 different types of fencing, 3 different colors in what was otherwise a repetitive scheme. And you can see here the plan of the house, but I think I might go actually onto the next one. No, wait a minute, this one, which shows you a kind of cut through the ground floor. And one of the things we did was we created in the front of the house, sorry, that's done. Sorry, let's go back. In the front of the house, this little glass house here, which is unheated, is uninsulated, but it adds about 10 or 15% onto the area of living space in the house. And it means that for most of the year, apart from a few days when it's going to be too hot or too cold, it's actually an incredibly useful extra living space for kids to play, for mending motorbikes, whatever it is you want to do. Next door to that was a little shed for containing bikes and so on. The living room was designed so that multiple things could happen in it. And there's a circular route through the house, because another thing we've discovered about houses and children is that children love to run round and round and round, and they love being able to disappear in one place and reappear in another. So this is the kitchen as built before anyone actually moved into it. Here you can see the houses with the little glass houses on the front there. There's also up above that, there's a large window on the landing, which kids can, it's got a deep sill, so kids can sit there and watch the world go by in perfect safety. And you can see the little house in the foreground here. This is the north gable, which with the whole buildings were clad in this local sweet chestnut shakes, they're called, or shingles. And you can also see the 2 funnels sticking up there of the MHVR, which is mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which was part of the ecological sustainability of the houses. So these houses ended up being pretty much zero carbon, zero energy, and they've proved very nice to live in. One of the things that the clients were terribly worried about, they said, "Oh, we can't just give them all one garden. We've got to put fences down in between the different bits of garden." And we said, "No, look, what we'll do is we'll make these slightly sunken patio areas, the wooden areas, which are private, quote private, and then you come up some steps into the garden, which is shared, where the children can play and so on. And so that's what happened, and it's worked perfectly. But we often find that housing clients get terribly worried about neighbourly interaction and that sort of thing. And I think the reason why is because too often neighbours are living in horrible places and they take it out on each other. But if you give them a nice place to live in, it works. I just wanted to show you that we don't only build houses, we sometimes build little blocks of flats, although this one isn't actually built yet. We designed it about 8 years ago, and it's still waiting to come out of the ground. It's built on the site of an old boiler house, and they've discovered too much contamination in the ground, so that they're having a real problem finding the money to get rid of that contamination before they can build the building. But this is a very simple block of flats, all of them affordable. Some of them social rent, some of them shared ownership, it's called in Britain, where you share your ownership with the housing provider. It's very simple, but what we did is we just made a play of the way that the balconies or terraces worked. So some of them are like inset lodgers, and some of them are these cantilevered balconies, which take this corrugated concrete theme from some of the mid-century housing that's all around this block in East London. You can see here it's a relatively simple building. There's an 8-story bit and a 3-story bit, and the 3-story bit relates back to the 3-story housing off to one side, which you can see on the bottom drawing. And here's a little night view of it as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on that one, but I'm going to move on to this project, which is not in the city. It's in a rather beautiful town called Southwold on the east coast of England. And in the middle there, just here, you can see the development that we built, which, because it was triangular, like that, it was called Tibby's Triangle, and it's right in the middle of the village. There's listed buildings all around it. In other words, historic buildings of historic importance. There's the Grade 1 listed church just here, right next to it, and the churchyard and a little playground here. So it was a very sensitive site where we had to work with the grain of what was happening there. Here's a close-up of what we did. And this was what the site was like when we first saw it. It was a distribution site for the local brewers, Adnams, it's a sort of company town, Southwold. It's kind of, Adnams is the main industry there, and they make very good beer, if anyone's ever drunk it. And so this was, this is our project seen from the air. And what we did is, this is the town's high street, and the town centre is down that way. And we made a new route through the kind of estate, or through the development, through the project, to connect these people who had always found it quite difficult to get to the high street. And we gave them a new route which allowed them to go through. But we also made other little routes, like little footpaths here, and then tiny little cul-de-sac footpaths going into the inside of the block in this area here. At the back, there are 34 houses and flats, and at the front, there's a cafe and a store, an Adnams store, which sells wine and kitchenware. And here's the cafe on the left and the store on the right. The store was built in the form of a kind of, if you like, almost like a village market hall. And then, in contrast, the cafe, which incorporates these brewery vats, which have been taken out of the brewery and which we made into seating snugs, has a very low roof. And the reason why it has that is so that we can bring the church tower into the composition, so that the church tower is acting as a kind of so-called borrowed landscape. It's a Japanese kind of landscape term, where you borrow a distant mountain or a distant prospect and use it as part of the composition that you're creating. So we grabbed the church here and a couple of the listed buildings, listed houses behind too. So this whole cafe, the whole thing opens up onto this courtyard. Here is a view of the shop, and this is the inside of the shop. All of the retail stuff can be wheeled aside, and it can be used as a kind of banqueting hall for Adnams, the firm that commissioned us. And that's why we created these kind of sort of chandelier type things hanging in the space too. Here's the cafe. It's a rainy day, so the windows are closed, but then in the summer, it all opens up. And this is one of the little brewery vats where they used to brew beer in, but which we converted and put a ceiling on and turned it into a very nice place to sit. At the back of, so you can see just to the left of this picture, the shop and the cafe, but at the back of the site are these 34 houses. They're all different. We used just very simple materials, local materials, but we tried to use them in a modernish kind of way, without kind of too many flounces and so on. Aluminium gutters, painted brick, sometimes natural brick. And with the windows, we used a simple set of windows, but we made some of them project out from the facade and some of them push into the facade, which creates a nice play of shadows. This is a plan of what we did. And just on affordable housing, you'll see that some of the houses have got an A in front of them, and that's A for affordable. And the point I want to make here is that our clients and in fact, everyone involved in the scheme apart from us all wanted to put these affordable houses in one little pocket of the site. Let's have a little close of affordable houses. And we said, no, let's pepper pot them all around the site. Let's mix them in with the quite expensive houses that were for sale in the rest of the site. And that's what we did in the end. And it worked incredibly well. So there are 34 homes, there are 10 affordable houses, and it makes a great community. There you can see it, and you can see these little lanes running through. You can see that we just fitted in parking where we could, and we managed to get most people a parking space, not everyone. But here you can see this kind of sense of the difference between individual houses. So this is a terrace of houses, but it's a very syncopated terrace, you might say. The chimneys, incidentally, are not actually chimneys for fireplaces. They are chimneys, they're vents for tumbler dryers, for boilers, for mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, so that they have a functional use, and the houses are very, very highly insulated, and they don't quite reach passive house standards, but for the time when they were built, which was around 2010, they were doing quite well. Here is some houses behind some other houses tucked in, picking up on some of the vernacular ways in which this little town, Southwold, dealt with its frontages. Not everything was on the street. Some things were tucked away behind, and we picked up on that. And here we created, overlooking the green, a large terrace of houses, which at first sight look all the same, but you'll see that the terrace is slightly humpbacked because each adjacent house is we slightly adjusted the floor to ceiling heights so that you get a slight syncopation in the rhythm. We slightly adjusted the width of the houses. We didn't paint one of the houses, and we also picked up on a local trope, which was painting the seaward end of the terrace black. This is like, because they used to paint buildings with black tar to keep the east wind, which was very wet, out of them. So here on a sunny day, horrible color umbrellas, but you can see the sense of the cafe working with the houses behind. The two on the right are affordable houses. And then behind, in the middle, there's a shop with 3 flats above it. Here's another view of those flats, which we were able to go up quite high at this point because it was where the warehouse had been high in the past. And there's an overall view of it. So I'm going to go to a very different site now, not a bucolic kind of semi-rural site, but a really hard industrial site on the edge of Newcastle upon Tyne, which is one of the towns which has been devastated ever since the miners' strike by Thatcherite policies, which closed down industry. So this is in a post-industrial valley. The huge bit of water you can see on the at the bottom is the River Tyne, and the little river running up is called the River Ouseburn. There it is, not very attractive. And our site is on the right-hand side here. This building was an old ice factory, which was knocked down. But although it was derelict, the valley, it nevertheless has got an incredibly vibrant music culture, because the only things that were left when everything was demolished were the pubs. And the pubs, because they could make as much noise as they wanted, played a lot of music. And what that meant was that we had to be quite careful in the design of our housing to make sure that it was soundproof enough and to not get complaints about the noise. So here is our site before we after that ice factory had gone, before the other building on the left-hand side had gone, before we started. And what you can't quite see in this picture, you can see now we're at high tide and the river is full of water rather than mud. What you can't quite see in this picture is that the top of the site is about 8 meters higher than the riverbank. So it really is a very, very steep slope on that site. And what had been proposed previously by, there were a number of schemes like this that had either gone in for planning permission or actually received planning permission, were blocks of flats like this, very generic, very, very ordinary. And, basically you end up with flats and car parks. And we thought, no, we don't want to do this. This isn't the way we want to treat this site. And what we proposed was this. So we created 5 fingers of houses rather than flats, although it gets a little bit more complicated than that, built along roads. So in other words, houses and roads and an open space in the middle of the site, in order to create a proper convivial neighborhood, rather than simply, stacked up hutches for people to live in. So there are these 5 fingers that stretch out down the slope. I think it was kind of that, people didn't understand why we were going against the contour rather than curving round with the contour. But by doing it this way, we opened it up to the southwest sun, and it also meant that everyone got a little bit of a view of the river, even at the back of the site. This is what it actually looks like in reality, and you can see the different kinds of houses that we built. Again, getting this 4-story, 3-story, 4-story, 3-story rhythm going up and down the hill. What's happening here is that the 3-story units are townhouses, they're individual houses, but the 4-story units, if you look carefully, you'll see each of them has 2 front doors. You can see that, say, here or here. And what's happening is that they are duplexes stacked above each other. So there is a lower duplex with a garden, and then there is an upper duplex with a terrace. And I'll show you in a minute how that works. This is a view down at ground level of how the thing is working. You can see, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, the thing that we went for quite a tight-knit arrangement here. This is a plan of it. And some of the separation distances were down to about 5 or 6 meters, which normally wouldn't be allowed. But what was interesting was that the local authority allowed us to do this because they could see what we were trying to do and they were interested in the experiment. And the reason why we were confident that, you see, I mean, quite often what happens when you're doing development is people say between one window and another window, there needs to be at least 15 meters or 21 meters or 22 meters. And you end up with, as a result, with these very suburban layouts with huge gardens that no one wants to look after. And we were very interested in creating an urban layout rather than a suburban layout. And so we pushed this as far as we could. And the reason why I was confident that this would work is because our studio here, which I'm sitting in, is in a little mews, which is these lanes that run through London and act as service roads to the bigger roads where the big houses are. And it's only 7 meters wide. And so we look straight across to the houses on the other side, 7 meters away, perfectly all right, never been a problem. And so we were confident that we could make this work. Here on the right-hand side here, you can see the main way that we did these houses. You have the 3-story houses on the right there, the 4-story houses next to them with 2 front doors, and the upper duplex opens out over the roof of the townhouse here, and then the townhouse itself has a garden here. So that was quite nice. But we also introduced another type of housing. In fact, we had quite a lot of different typologies. We also had back-to-back houses and courtyard houses, but which I won't go into now. But this one was interesting. It's 6 stories high, a tower house, starting down at quayside level and going up to a larger ground floor, which you can see here, and then up a little spiral staircase, almost not quite a spiral, with a bedroom on each floor, going up through the through the stages. And these tower houses turned out to be incredibly popular. They were the first to be sold on the site, but all the houses were, although these, it was interesting, these were meant to be affordable houses, but in the end, because we had to repair the quay wall here, which belonged to the city council, it was so expensive that they allowed these not to be affordable houses because they recognized we'd made a contribution to the public realm here. So that they were all sold, but they were sold at very low cost because the market in Newcastle upon Tyne isn't a great one. But so we had to build them very simply, very cheaply, standard windows, simple local brick, and so on. You can see the photovoltaics on the roof. And you can also see here, there's 2 things I want to point out in this picture. One is how close the houses are together, but also, you know, we created these shared spaces in the middle where you can grow food and that sort of thing. And we also made these little convivial areas here in the middle of the site. You can see some people sitting around the picnic table in the middle of the site here, on this flat bit of ground here. And behind them, another thing we did is front stage the refuse and recycling. It's behind a screen, so you don't see it when you're in the place, but it's right in the middle of everything. Because we found that by making people share their refuse and recycling, it's a bit like going to the village well. Everyone goes there, and it works quite nicely. And it also, by front staging it, it means that people don't make a mess of it. They look after it. There it is in the context of Newcastle on Tyne. You can see it tucked in the valley here, and here are some views of it. We were also the landscape gardeners landscapers for the project, and we took a lot of trouble over that landscape. Here is one of those shared areas in the centre with small gardens on either side. Here's a view looking up the river at low tide, and at slightly mid-tide, like that. And the river walk, which we also incorporated into the scheme, there hadn't been one before, is now a part of the public realm of Newcastle and has worked quite nicely. And lately a bakery has opened just here, and it's so popular that you've got this enormous queue of people. This was during COVID, so you can see they're standing quite far apart, which is added to the thing. And one of the things we did here is when we had finished the project, we did some sort of post-occupancy evaluation, and we didn't go around with a pinboard and ask them standard questions. We just sort of tried to find out what it was like to live there. And we just got these lovely answers, like these people talking about how they loved sitting on top of the water butt because it was where the last of the sun came. And my favorite was these folk who said the house stopped us arguing, which is I thought was quite funny. Right, I'm going to go on to another project now. This one is 475 houses. We were the master planners and chief architects of it. And of those 475 houses, a third were affordable. It was originally an old waste transfer site, very contaminated, but it's got a canal along one side and a motorway here. There it is close up. And we did, before we knew quite what we wanted to do with this site, we did this little drawing and just to sort of find out what it was going to be like. We didn't quite know what the architecture was or even quite what the brief was, but what we were interested in doing was creating a place which was a natural part of the area of London. So it wasn't all one thing. It wasn't an estate. It didn't have design themes to it. It was like lots of different things happening in the same way that when you walk through this area of London, that's what it feels like. Here's the canal along one side of it. Sorry, no, I'm not going to play that now. And this is what the final master plan ended up as, possibly a little more regular than it was before. But what you'll notice is lots and lots of roof gardens to increase the amount of open space. There's also a linear park along the canal. And here I'll just show you some views of it. Here are some of the new flats, and we're revamping this old storage facility alongside the canal here, turning it into a cafe. Here are some more of the apartments with a restaurant down at ground level, restaurant, shops, old buildings and new buildings, and the canal walk. And here is where the motorway goes across the canal, and where we created this rather sculptural building at the end of the run, which kind of is almost like a signpost for the development. Now this project, these are all CGIs. This project is being built at the moment. I don't have any construction pictures of it, but we're hoping in the next few years it will become a real place. And I'm going to finish with excuse me, with this project, which is current. And it's the largest one of all. It's 700 homes in a small town in Sussex, about 50 miles south of London, not far from the coast. Beautiful, beautiful town and beautiful countryside. But this area where the site is, which you can see ringed in red, is an old industrial and commercial estate. But this is the rest of the town looks something like this. It's very, very charming, very attractive. It's got this old castle that dominates it. And the thing about the site that we've got is that you can just make out here the line of a river running through here. But in the year 2000, it flooded catastrophically and flooded the whole area of our site. So as a result of that, you know, the industrial estate kind of more or less collapsed and closed down, and ever since they've been looking for uses for it. And what we're doing is we are part of a team of about 10 architects who have developed a master plan and then taken different parts of this site. And it will be the largest timber-based construction, residential construction in Britain so far. And these houses are going to be extremely, they're basically going to be passive house standard. They're going to forego parking nearby or anything like that. Parking is severely restricted. It's going to be a bicycle and walking neighborhood. And we've at the moment are involved in developing 2 or 3 of the different pockets of this, and I'm going to show you one of them now. So here is the whole, whoops, sorry. Here, yeah, that's good. Here is the whole master plan. You can see it kind of connects in with the existing parts of town. There's a new bridge going across the river here. There's an existing footbridge just here. And we're involved in this site here in the town, or the sort of village centre, I suppose, which is in this area. But the very first bit that's going to be developed is this piece, which is called Jacobs Square. And Jacobs is named after Jane Jacobs, the great American urbanist who you either know about or should know about. She wrote a wonderful book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, and it's a touchstone for us at any rate. This is our little corner, Jacobs Square, although in fact it's triangular. It's made up of 3 terraces, irregular terraces, one of them overlooking the river on the left, the one in the front here overlooking a beautiful area of unspoilt woodland, and the one at the back, not these ones with the arch windows which are next door, but this one here, just opening onto a courtyard on one side and a little mews on the other. Here's a plan of how that works. We've got these 3 terraces, Pell's Terrace, Rivers Terrace, and Malling Terrace, and a quite complexly landscaped square in the middle. We did the landscaping in conjunction with another company called Periscope, and the whole thing is surrounded by a flood wall, which it runs round like this. Oops. But it also has to deal with fluvial flooding, which is like flooding from rainwater. So this whole thing is a kind of rain garden, slightly sunken from the level of these pathways around that connect into the houses. And we're using a similar set of typologies to what I showed you up in Newcastle, where we're having stacked duplexes in some of them, we're having townhouses in other ones, and we're also having little flats in other ones. There are 8 affordable units, again, pepper potted among the private for sale units in this scheme. And this is what some of the elevations of it will look like. We're using a timber frame construction infilled with hempcrete, which is it's the stuff that cannabis comes from, hemp plants. You chop it up, mix it with lime, and you get a very highly insulating material, and you can make solid walls with it, which are just on either side of the timber. And then we're coating or facing that hempcrete with lime render on the outside and lime plaster on the inside. And we're taking advantage of that to decorate some of the houses, like this one here, for example, and this one here, with lime washed colors. We're also using some of the old steels from the old buildings on the site to create some artwork here, and also to hold up 1 or 2 of the buildings as well. We're making little caryatids, human figures out of these steels in order to hold up the buildings. You can see here again, like certain houses have got 2 front doors, rather like I showed you before. Other ones have got just 1 front doors. And the ends of the terrace are always double houses. So you're seeing a house there, but there's another one behind. Here are some more sections. We want it to be very green. We want vertical greening, as well as roof terraces, and as well as planting on the ground. And I'll just show you some images of it. This is the existing footbridge and what we're doing behind. Again, here's the footbridge on the right, and this is a view of those houses running along the river. Here are those caryatids, these human figures that I was talking about, made out of steel, that hold up this building, and decorated lime render on the ends of these buildings, like that. This is the view into the courtyard. Another decorated building at the end there, but we're trying to show this sense of conviviality, this way in which you can personalize the threshold just outside your house. It will be okay for you to put out chairs and tables, to put out plants and so on, and for it to become a very happy place. Here almost too happy, possibly. And this is a view coming towards the development from the rest of town. This is the first view you get of it. A night view. These woods, they're very sensitive to local people, and we wanted to demonstrate that our project wouldn't be unduly disruptive to the nightlife, to the bats, to the birds, and so on. So one of the things we're doing, not just because of this, but also for environmental reasons, is that all the windows have got shutters on, which is very unusual in Britain. I think it's much more usual in Australia and Brisbane, but in Britain, it's quite an unusual thing to do. And you can see here some of the shutters closed against the light. Here's a view from those woodlands looking back, showing the way in which the woodland screens the terrace. And this is some of the life going on inside the courtyard with a bicycle store shared by everyone, a little garden room where everyone can garden together, and so on. So I just want to one last time say, think about users all the time when you're designing. Think about what it's going to be like to live in. Try to make communities which are going to be very, very neighborly. Find prompts for them for people to come together. Things like shared bike stores, shared refuse stores, and so on. And just look very carefully at the particularities of your site. So rather than trying to design according to some architectural theory or other, design for the site and find reasons to create particularity in different corners of the site. So that's it. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Robert. And in this series, we've expressed repeatedly the frustration of not being able to have group applause for the speakers. So please accept a virtual applause from our crowd. Truly inspiring work. I might mention my son lives in Newcastle upon Tyne, and I visit him most years, and he's taken me to that music precinct, and I'll have to take the trouble to visit your project next time, particularly those tower houses, which look most intriguing. But
Great.
look, for the moment, we'll go. Sorry, you go, Robert.
No, I was just going to say, do come and see us at the same time. That would be wonderful.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we'll have questions at the end combined, and we'll move on now to Trisha Patel. Trisha's a leader at Pollard Thomas Edwards, another highly regarded practice in London. And I'll just hand over to you, Trisha.
Oh, thank you very much. And thank you, Robert. That's so inspiring. I have visited that house in Newcastle. I absolutely love it. I want one of the townhouses. And Southwold, again, absolutely wonderful project that I visited. So thank you very much, Robert. I'm just going to share screen. Can you see that?
I'll share.
Try again. So. Can you see that?
I got that now. You might like to change it to a full screen view, Trisha.
Yeah, no, I'm going to do that. I just wanted to start.
Sure.
There we go. Hi.
Great, thank
All
you.
good.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, my name is Trisha Patel. I'm a partner at Pollard Thomas Edwards. I'm speaking to you today from our office in Islington in London. We are about 100 strong, and our home is this warehouse on a London canal. We are about 50 years old this year, and our first project was affordable housing, and delivering homes and affordable housing has been at the core and the heart of our practice ever since. And like Robert, there's a real synergy there. Since the 1970s, we've been engaging with the people we are making homes for. And our method is simple. We basically, with everything we do, we aim to involve the people who matter most. And our next evolution in engagement is our social value project, where we're working together with Reading and Cambridge University to gather data. Now, what does that gathering of data mean? It's exactly what Robert was describing. It's a deep dive into post-occupancy evaluation, meeting as many residents in homes we've built and others have built to really understand what matters and what's working and what's not working. And we're really mapping how people actually furnish and use their homes. And Robert, you're absolutely right. Kitchens are the most important room in the house, and you need to have a table in the kitchen. Once we have finished this project, the idea is to build a BIM tool to measure the social value of decent housing. Stats are everything, and if we are to persuade the people who give funding, which we all desperately need, these stats are part of helping to build that story and that drive for decent, affordable homes. Estate regeneration is where I've spent a large part of my career, and that has really fueled my passion, both for affordable housing and for engagement with residents. Because in estate regeneration, you meet the end users, and as Robert has clearly demonstrated, probably nothing matters more. After the Second World War and into the 70s, there was a huge housing programme which resulted in some fantastic affordable housing in our major cities. And these have really often suffered over time with a lack of investment, and some did become problematic. And this is a really huge subject for today. So please feel free to have a look at these publications where we collaborated as 4 practices. They're downloadable, and I've sent Mark a link. So they are tackling the subject of estate regeneration in all its forms, and Altered Estates 2 is the more recent one in 2022. Many of these estates have involved whole-scale change in the last 20 years, which might be full regeneration in phases, rehousing existing residents alongside new. And in fact, this one on the left, which is in Islington, not too far from the office, is a story of 2 halves, where there's all of this area here will be new housing, but on the right-hand side, there is some quite well-loved interwar housing, which we are doing a deep dive retrofit on. And if we can crack that model, because there is a lot of this around London, this is a model that could be rolled out across London and would make this housing much more sustainable. But today I want to focus on the potential within these existing estates for smaller scale interventions with a positive impact, and that's what we call infill projects. And you can see some examples here. With a stronger focus on retrofit, I think these projects will be ever more important. It's making the most of use of local authority land. It's a more sustainable reduction in demolition while still producing excellent social housing. There's so many of these leftover spaces on estates that you can see here. There's old garages, neglected concrete corners. There's lots of little places where we can really produce decent homes. I mean, these are just some of the projects here of our infill projects. This doesn't count those that are underway as well. And I think at the moment, we did a little count yesterday, I think we've delivered almost 900 homes so far on infill sites. So there's a huge potential here. And what I want to do slightly differently from Robert today is do a real deep dive into one project, one infill project, and really give you, share with you some of the pain as well as the nice ending of the project along its journey. This is Dovercourt Estates. It was very popular. There were no structural problems. It had high values, and it had obvious opportunities for infill, such as old garages. It looks a bit lovely from the air here, and there were open spaces and some really lovely large trees. But once you get down on the ground, there were serious issues between the buildings that needed resolving. So this is a little bit about the story of how we got from these befores to after today. And it started really slowly, to be honest, and it wasn't till a fantastic client, here's our client Alistair from Islington Council, came along that this seriously got going. You really do need a good client for a project. It's very important, who has the passion to see things through and also believes in what you're trying to do and comes with you on the journey. We took about a year to engage properly with the residents on the estate to find out what was actually needed. It wasn't just about filling in gaps. And there was no community centre, which was a gap here. And so we used this little trailer here on the right. And we would move around the estate different times a day, different places over the year to try and talk to as many people as possible. And what I'd say if you're doing a project is don't just talk to the people who are involved, but you have to talk to all the neighbours as well. You want to get the neighbours on board and you want them to be an ally and also listen to their concerns. We also carried out many visits to what we identified was quite a vulnerable group of older residents, and we ended up designing some particular housing for them. And we would just go and do a lot of individual visits because they were quite anxious about what was happening and about change. So what we found out was that Islington were willing to do what they call local lettings. What that means is you're meeting originally the housing needs on the estate. So if someone is in need on the estate, they would get priority in the new housing. This is really important. If you're going to turn someone's estate into a building site, and believe me, it's disruptive, then giving them priority for the housing is really important to bringing everyone on board and only feels fair. So what we found out with all the consultation is the housing needs was for older people who wanted to remain on the estate, but they were living in unsuitable accommodation that was too big, that wasn't accessible, and families who were very overcrowded. So that was our brief for the homes. But also there was a wish for somewhere for people to get together, that convivial place that Robert so articulated so well, a place to gather, a place to be convivial. And the public realm was depressing and problematic, and there were some real antisocial and behaviour hotspots, and safety was a massive issue, especially for older residents who felt quite unsafe and wouldn't go out after dark, which is a terrible shame. So this evolved into our brief. So you can see here the existing layout, and in red is the demolition. So most of the demolition, apart from one block, which I'll talk about in a minute, was garages. I'll talk a bit more about these garages in a minute. They're 1960s garages and they don't fit modern cars. So they were filled with all sorts of junk. And in fact, when we opened one of them, it was filled with metal from the estate. So that was interesting. But one block was demolished because it was really unsuitable, very unpleasant little bed sits. So that was the only block that was demolished, and we could get a much better set of homes in that location. So you can see in pink and blue the homes here. Now, because the values were so good here and because values and build costs were a bit better a few years ago, we managed to do 70% affordable homes and subsidised by 30% private sale homes. So that's a very good stat. And in fact, we got some funding later on, so it ended up 54 affordable homes, social rent, the lowest rent that can be, and only 16 private homes, as well as the improvements to the public realm. So when the estate was built, the Victorian street pattern was disrupted. There were streets being blocked and confusion over backs and fronts. And through the reorganization of public connections and open spaces, including this very important central north-south route through the whole estate, we managed to plan a safe journey home for all residents. So nearly every single resident on the estate can come home through this central route, which is now well overlooked and well lit. And we were able to resolve some of the issues around backs and fronts. There was a sort of back alley down here before, which there'd been some muggings on. So that became back garden to back garden with fronts overlooking the park. So we were able to resolve some of that. But the other thing that's really important is that we managed to stitch the estate back into the neighbouring streets. It had become a little bit them and us, and there were these strange metal gates there. So we've managed to stitch back into the existing surrounding street pattern. So just looking at each area, this is the north area, and you can see the rather bleak garages here, and this is where we built some homes. And you can also see there was quite a lot of sort of herds of bins that would be around the estate, which was quite depressing. And the journey home wasn't great, and there was huge areas of concrete. And the only thing that was lovely here was this tall building had some rather lovely legs, which we wanted to keep showing. So we'll come to this area. So just in this northern area, we managed to provide some new homes, replace the garages with some new family affordable homes, and a new play area, and transformed Threadgold House. What was important here was very much thinking about everyone's journey home and routes through the estate. They had become confused and unpleasant. So there's a bus stop here. Lots of people walk around here. There's cycle routes. So these paths and these connections, we mapped those out looking at desire lines and the way people wanted to come home, and worked really carefully with the landscape architect, who I have to say, Farah Huxley, were absolutely marvellous. One of the things we wanted to do with the building with the lovely legs is transform what was a pile of garages into that lovely little community room where people could gather. We'll talk a little bit more about bins later, but tuck all the bins neatly into a couple of nice bin stores rather than roaming the landscape. Provide a cycle store for the residents who had none and were trying to drag things up in a lift. And we also provided a little buggy store as well, a wheelchair flat, and some caretaker facilities. This all looked great on paper, but it was a massive challenge in real life. I've got some pictures of that later as well. So here is the before. So there's some very strange decisions made, like little railings around, bits of grass. We don't know what's going on there. And these empty garages and a play area. And as the landscape architect pointed out, always look at a play area. If it's all mossy, no one's using it. So this was in a really unpleasant spot, right on a busy street. So we wanted to change all that. So this is the after. So on the right here is where those garages were. So we've now got some new family affordable homes with their own back gardens and nice little front gardens, and they're overlooking this play area, which we moved to the south, connected to the community room, and also in a really sunny spot and away from the traffic. It's really well used now. This is our little community room that we managed to tuck under that existing building, and while still keeping the legs. And these are some of the private homes that we had to tuck these two in right at the last minute to help the funding, but I visited the residents, they're very popular, so that was great. So that's the north area of the estate. And as well as that, the journey home for everybody, this central route here that you can see, this is the start of that central route, and you can just see it feels a lot safer with lots of homes overlooking it. This is a very boring diagram, but just can I say, this is something I was most proud of. We spent an incredibly long time, this is where the detail matters, sorting out the bin strategy for every single existing home, as well as the new homes. There were herds of bins around the estate. It was really depressing. And the herds of bins would gather other stuff that was even more revolting. And so in terms of quality of the environment for residents, it felt very degraded. So this has been something that's actually a lot of residents have commented on, is how clean and nice it all feels. So that has been a great success. But we also tried, as Robert was saying, if you go into a bin store, how does it feel? So there's one that's got some nice planting next to it and a bench. You might do your recycling and meet a neighbour. So we had a little think about where people meet each other as well. But that's actually, it's such a boring diagram, but it's one of the great successes of the project. And then we realized we needed something for the big stuff that does get dumped. So we didn't have much money left, so we just did these terribly simple little screens, and people behave very well, and they put all their stuff in these, and these chaps are very nice, and they pick it up regularly. So that's a great success. The only thing is it's too successful, and all the neighbours have started using it. So that can't do anything about that. Then we moved just to look at the southern and central area. And there's some really interesting lessons I learned here as well. These are some really awful garages, and terrible things were going on in there as well. there was a big green space in the centre, and you thought, well, that should be successful. In actual fact, there were railings all around it. And because there's railings all around it, what was happening is local dog walkers, big thing in London, they were putting all the dogs in, letting them run loose, closing the gate instead of just standing there. So this had become basically nothing but a dog walker's loo, really. And it was really unpleasant, and the residents wouldn't put the children in it at all. So one first thing was taking the railings down and then reconfiguring that space. There was so much opportunity here on this estate that we managed to build 70 homes, but increase the amount of green space and play space quite a lot. This sunken ball court, you can see it's not really used as a ball court, had become quite a serious dealing area, so we needed to deal with that. As well as that, I sort of, you do wonder about some things that happened over time. The homes on this top right picture, all the ground floor homes existing had these very strange little concrete areas with a little railing around it. And you think, well, no one's going to use that. That's not really a space. And they felt very exposed as well. So by giving each existing resident a little front garden, a little wall and some planting, we managed to reclaim this space. And that's one of the ways we were able to increase the green space. So that's that central area. So there's our plan for the central area. And again, there's that central path, that central way home for nearly all residents. That's where the sunken ball court was. So we've got our neat little front gardens, and we've got our new landscaped area here. And then we've got our new homes here with the front to back relationship and family homes overlooking the street. And then we've got our special block here, which is our homes for older residents, and a little mews here. So it is not decreasing the green space, providing a ball court, and providing that range of homes that residents needed, but each
Trish, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but you've
here.
frozen.
Ah,
Okay,
you're
back with us now. Yeah, only for 10 seconds. It's fine. Go ahead.
Oh, apologies. I should have good connection. Apologies. Do let me know if that's happened again. One of the first things we had to do was move the ball court. Placing a ball court next to anybody is a world of pain. Everybody wants it, but nobody wants to be next to it. So we had to build acoustic barriers. We put it in a dip. We had special lighting. We met all the neighbours. We also provided some other neighbourly benefits. And it's really important, again, with that engagement when you're going to do something like this, so you don't get an objection. So we managed to do that. And then one of the most important things we did was build this older people's housing, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. And that became so popular that lots of older residents moved out of larger homes to move into this block. They came out of these larger homes, put their hands up and said, I'd love one of these. And this released family homes in the estate for the overcrowded families. And this shifting around into more appropriate size homes has real potential to help the housing waiting list. So the right infill homes can help this, and especially providing the housing for later living, which lets older residents remain where they've always lived. And this is a view then through that central route. This is where that sunken ball court was before. And this is that safe journey home, well lit for all residents. And this has really made a huge difference to residents' well-being. They've told us that feeling of safety coming home, and the fact that there's a much bigger footfall has also helped. Also, there were some metal barriers between the estates and the wider, the neighbours and the neighbouring streets. It was a bit them and us. So this project has really stitched the estate back into the surrounding area, and it's created a more integrated relationship with the wider neighbourhood, and it's provided safe, attractive routes home for everybody, and including the neighbours as well. And this is the new ball court that's slightly in the dip, and it's got this sunken area here where you can sit and you can watch everybody play in the summer. It has this is the other end of that central spine route through. And the only problem here is it's actually become incredibly popular. It's huge popularity after school. So the caretaker sometimes has to come out and have a little word, but being too popular is better than not being used, I'd say. We also work really closely with the on-site caretaking team and the council to make sure that the landscape could be managed in the future within the allocated budget. I am genuinely concerned a little bit about stewardship of landscape. Already there are some trees that need replacing. I think getting responsibilities on who's looking after what is really important, but budgets at the moment are beyond tight. So it's really important with anything you're doing, the housing or the landscape, to think about that long-term stewardship, engage with who's going to be looking after it and work together with them. This was really sweet. This was a newspaper article that was sent to us about walkable neighbourhoods in London and green and healthy streets. And they cited Dover Court as an example of the potential of estate improvements to add to London's healthy street and walkability through the city. So I thought this was really lovely. And actually, we have been mapping a bit of footfall, and it certainly is very transformed for people would not have come through here really very much before. So that was lovely to hear. One thing I would say is that I was asked recently, can infill sites be simple, modular, repeat types? And I think coming back to Robert's point, I would say this is tricky, and we've been asked by clients to do this, and it wouldn't realize the full potential of these very unique spaces. We have a range of homes that are very bespoke, but they make the most of every corner. And the architecture that responds to each unique space. And I think Robert was very clear on that. Each project was very special that we heard from Ash Sakula. And I think even with an infill project, we did have to, on a very tight budget, we couldn't play with too many bricks, too many details, but each typology of home did respond to their unique setting. So in this one, for example, in speaking to the residents, we realized that this little garden wasn't in the best spot. So they were very excited about having a roof terrace as well. And I know that some of the client group were saying, oh, we don't usually have affordable homes with a roof terrace, but they had a lovely kitchen dining family room where most things were going to go on, as Robert was saying as well. And then the family were excited about having this different space, you know, maybe where the teenagers sit or the adults later in the evening. So that's been really successful. And they were on a very particular site where this back garden wasn't going to get very much sun. This is the older people's housing that I was talking about earlier. And one of the things we wanted to do, and it doesn't look convivial here because this photograph is taken before anyone's moved in, but what we wanted to do was every resident has a sunny balcony to the south, but also we produced this gallery access to the north, which is overlooking that park where all the activity is going on. And on that gallery access, we located the kitchen so that the residents, you know, at the sink looking out the window and can wave to a neighbour. And so there's that chance to say hello and to be convivial. Also on the deck, we pushed out these areas where they've got your gallery, people are walking, but beyond that, there's these little shared spaces where people have started to put plants and chairs, and so people can sit there, and if they want to be very sociable they can sit out there, or one neighbour says she leaves her door open when she wants to chat to a neighbour. So this gallery access is a really nice way of making a convivial space, and for older residents especially important, as loneliness can be such a big issue. So without making a big deal of it, you can just sort of sit there and look out, and then you might bump into a neighbour. So that was our housing for older people. And as I say, this became incredibly popular, and lots of people came out the woodwork who were living in 3-bed homes in the estate and said, actually, I will now put my hand up and move into this. And that released some family homes. And a lot of older people on estates are struggling with homes that aren't suitable, but they're very scared to say anything because they don't want to move away and they don't want to be put somewhere where they don't know their neighbours. In the northern area, these family homes, again, we had an issue where there was at the back here, we couldn't have really any overlooking. So all the bedrooms had to face, which was lucky, the sunny side and overlooking the play. but we could put the stairs and the loo at the back with some little roof lights. And on the ground floor, we could have access to a garden. So again, it's about making a bespoke home for the particular location. That's really, really important with infill sites. These were some little private mews houses that were part of the funding everything else. So it was important to get these right. And these could have absolutely no overlooking to the neighbours at the back. So they're single aspect. They work really well. We've got a living, flowing kitchen, dining, living space with a very sweet little internal terrace garden. And then on the upper floor, they have a little terrace as well. So again, that was a very scary lane and there was quite a lot of bad stuff going on there, and that's now very well used and connected to the surrounding streets. And lastly, this is again a picture here of the older people's flats. This is the sunny balcony side. And this is the gallery deck access side. And just a little bit about some of the challenges of actually making this real, because I was doing all the drawings and the planning, and my Australian colleague, who sadly can't join us today, had the hard work together with, I was working with her, but she really did the hard graft of making this into reality. So there's one thing on paper and there's another one making things happen, which I'm sure Robert will identify with. So one of the first things, whatever you're doing, is just getting into the nitty gritty. Please do check out all the underground services. They're never where you want them to be. And then even once you've mapped them, once you start digging, they've moved. So there was a real challenge there in designing our buildings. We had to shift the older people's housing slightly to miss a large pipe. There's also tree root zones. We didn't want to get rid of any of those beautiful existing trees. So this was, one of the big challenges that we had to not spend too much money on, because if you start moving major services, it costs a fortune. So again, you're always coming back to your budget as well. You really have to think and work closely with the client on budget and not spend your money wisely, because with affordable housing, there could be a really tight budget. And in fact, budgets have become even tighter. So spend your money wisely. So on paper, I thought this was a wonderful idea where these residents in these existing homes were having real problems. Some of them were getting older, and again, not everyone could have one of the new homes, so they couldn't get up and down the stairs with shopping, etc. So we thought, why don't we have some of the new homes and share a lift core so that the lift can serve the new deck and the old deck. So this was nice on paper, but if you can see on the left, the complexity of doing this, keeping access, keeping it safe, keeping a safe fire exit, keeping the residents with access at all times, the complexity of what we found in here. So in real life, a lot of this is very, very complicated. And if you're working with existing buildings, nothing is simple, and you have to do a lot of work on site to see what's happening. So well done, my Australian colleague, for working all this out. And actually it works now, and it really has made these homes accessible. So that's fantastic. You saw the nice community room and pictures of the lovely community room earlier. So and the wheelchair flats and the caretakers, and this was all fantastic idea, and we'd measured it all out. And then you uncover what's actually there, and it was really tricky. There is all these people living above, and you can't cut off their services, you can't cut off their water, you can't cut off their gas, you can't cut off their electricity, and there's all this scary stuff, pipes and things. You can see this, lots of graffiti going, "Don't touch that water line, don't touch this electric." So this was incredibly difficult to do, remodeling this building at the bottom into a community centre, wheelchair flat, and all of that with occupied homes above. But we got there. But everything is more challenging on the ground than on paper. And I would encourage every student to try and get on as many sites as possible. And yes, there is the lovely finished product, and there is my colleague who did all the hard work, Charina. And we used a really lovely green glazed brick behind the legs of the building, which really made these pop as well. The other thing we did is we have an in-house graphics team, and they worked on the graphics together with the residents for the community centre, but we also built an app for the residents to use to book in events. So there's a really sweet little app for this community centre that the residents really enjoy using to book in space and events. The other thing that's important if you're working on estate regeneration is phasing. Nothing happens in one go. It has to be delivered in phases. It has to be really carefully planned to enable continuous safe access for existing residents, for emergency services, for servicing, just day-to-day servicing. So this was really complicated. The project did take longer than planned. We have to do residential access points, caretakers needed access, we had to think about refuse collection, we had to think about the tree root zones, which we were very aware of. And we also needed to deliver some early wins as well. So you can see with the yellow is the extent of scaffolding, and the blue is the extent of hoarding and where deliveries could occur. So this was complicated stuff, working out all the phasing together with the contractor. But you also have to deliver, I think, with any project, some early wins. Otherwise, the residents would lose heart, because this is very disruptive, and it was also important to engage with residents through the process. You can't just do the drawings, disappear, and then leave them to the construction. So it's really important to continue engaging and talking with residents throughout the entire process, and to keep updating them. Even if there's been a delay or something's gone wrong, be honest and be communicative. But also, as I was saying before, it's really important to deliver some early wins. So the first early win that residents wanted was the ball court and half the park to begin with. So we delivered this, as I say, this ball court and the park to begin with. And the first housing we delivered was the housing for the older residents, which again released another block, and then all the jigsaw pieces started moving. So early wins are very, very important. And then the other thing is, I think, as Robert was saying, to kind of be of the place you're building and to reference some of the architecture that was already there. We didn't want it to be a them and us place. We wanted the architecture to integrate and pick up on some of the references from the earlier architecture that's already there. So there was some rather sweet brick detailing in the walls, and we picked up on that in our own walls here. And also there was some hit and miss brickwork. So this is this picture here is the little internal courtyard for those little mews houses. And so we wanted to give some transparency and some overlooking, but also some privacy. And this is where my colleague Charina really worked really hard with the contractor. We went to visit another site where the hit and miss brickwork was happening to see how it was working. And we went together with the contractor and worked it out and how it's going to work and get the detail right. There's an awful lot goes behind what sometimes look like just the lovely pictures at the end. So I do find this fascinating. And again, I would encourage students to really get involved in how things are built, because what I would say is design doesn't finish at the planning stage. Design is all the way through every detail right to the very end. And things don't always get built as you want, and that can be frustrating, but we do our best. And again, Sharina did this drawing for the bricklayer to try and get this lovely patterned brick on this wall here of these homes. And she worked together with the bricklayer to say, how can I communicate to you what I want? I don't know if it's exactly this, but it is really sweet how it ended up anyway. And that was a really lovely collaborative exercise where sometimes with the main contractor it was very challenging, but with the subcontractors we had a really good relationship. And then again, just again thinking about the detailing of the zinc cladding, again we worked really closely, and you learn working with people who know how to build things. We learned so much about zinc and I went to site as well, and we worked really carefully with this fantastic subcontractor on the detail and how actually each element in each fold would work. So it's not exactly as we drew it because we understood it couldn't be. So we worked together on what that detail might be. Now, you don't always get the chance to do this on site, and I think that's a loss to the built environment where architects are left out of the process, which is increasingly happening. So that collaboration between construction and architecture is really important. It's where I started in my career. It's starting to get lost, and it's really important to keep close to the build and the people who are making things. And just really to complete the story, so we're doing lots of interviews with the residents who are living here as well. And I think we're acutely aware right now as a practice of how challenging it is to deliver affordable homes. It is such a challenging climate financially and politically, and sometimes it become really overwhelming and you just can lose sight of the bigger picture. But I'm actually retiring at the end of this month, and I'm really happy to look back and have been part of a team that's delivered so much decent affordable homes and is still delivering affordable homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia, and please accept a big virtual applause as well.
Will I stop
fabulous
sharing?
presentation. Yes, please.
Okay.
So
I
it's
forgot how to
really,
do that.
I think, down the bottom that should, where you shared screen, I imagine.
Got it.
That's
Sorry.
it. Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Look, it's really inspiring from both of you to see you starting your design journey with that intention for positive social impact, and yet delivering work which is so inviting and so attractive. And I guess I've long had an opinion that British architects involved in multi-residential do seem to capture a very beautiful domestic scale and aesthetic diversity that's very inviting for occupancy, and that sort of urban texture, and even down to the texture of the brickwork. It's a really homely, attractive outcome. So I've got a number of clusters of questions so far, and more coming in. So I'll just address the questions to both of them. You can answer in turn as you sort of negotiate between yourselves, if that's okay. Look, affordable housing and social housing has been defined to the students in our setting like this. So affordable housing is offered at essentially 70% of the market rate in a particular suburb or place, and social housing is offered as housing that's 30% of household income. A couple of questions relating to that. How is that set up in Britain? And possibly more to you, Robert, how are they differentiated when they're peppered through a large development? Is it a different architecture, or is it merely a different financial arrangement?
I don't mind starting and then Robert can jump in. I mean, what I'd say about what both of us would be passionate about, I'd say, is that our projects are tenure blind. You cannot tell what is private and what is not private. Within the home, there might be a snazzier bathroom for sales or a posher kitchen, but from externally, it's really, really important to both our practices that this is not, that there is not a them and us architecture, and it's tenure blind. In terms of the funding, this is where the model is starting to get broken, and we definitely have a housing crisis in London and throughout the country. So there was a real problem here with funding for social housing. This particular project was the lowest of rent possible with Islington Council, but I know on new infill projects they're really struggling to make this cross-subsidy model work with the private paying for the social. So this was a model that is starting to now break. So there's many different types of affordable housing. There's intermediate, where you might share ownership a home, you own part. There's social rent with local authorities, and then there's housing associations which have ranges of rents. And there's now a London living rent. So there are many, many models of what's called affordable housing, but it is starting to get to the point where a lot of that isn't affordable. So there is a bit of a challenge here.
Yeah, I agree, and I think your figures of I think 70% and 30% that you just mentioned, they sound more generous to low-income households than exists here. So that you're getting a gradual emptying out in London, where prices are much higher than the rest of the country, of lower income families, and so as a result, it's becoming more and more sort of ghettoized for the rich London. But it hasn't, it'll take a long time for it to happen, and with a bit of luck, the Tories will be out and we'll have Labour back in, and that might help shift things a bit. You were just asking about are they different? No, they're not. I mean, sometimes you do sometimes get a situation where maybe the kitchen units might be to a lower specification, or the bathroom might be to a lower specification. You sometimes actually get a situation where, because the housing providers for the affordable housing have certain very strict requirements, you actually get better space standards in the affordable housing than in the private housing, because a private developer is perfectly happy to call a kind of 10 square meter bedroom a double room, whereas an affordable housing provider will insist on 11.5 or 12 square meters. So it's interesting that, yeah. But
Robert,
I mean,
you're absolutely right. Yeah, there's a housing regeneration that I'm doing in Enfield, where we're absolutely committed to the residents having a kitchen with a window, which interestingly, on the private units, they're very happy to do a deep plan, living balcony, open plan kitchen at the back. So our affordable residents each have the ability to have a separate kitchen with a partition there or not, but with the kitchen with a window. So they definitely have the better plans for that reason. So that's really great.
Okay. Look, there's a number of questions around public space, community space for residents, private space. I'm talking external space. And you both seem to have managed that very skillfully. Your pathways through the site, for example, giving back to the city. How do you find that occupancy works after the event? So you've got some shared gardens, for instance, Robert. You've got community parks, Tricia. Is there any sort of conflict or confusion over the definition and use of those spaces?
Well, it's interesting. I would say, I mean, the management of housing is slightly separate from the architecture of housing, but it's incredibly important that when you're designing, and I think Tricia said some of this, that you're aware of what the arrangements are going to be after you go away and so on. Because if you set up kind of complex situations which can't be financed, or which are too complicated for the poor guys on site to run, then it just won't happen. But what I'm really interested in is creating kind of self-generating conviviality, where it's actually not to do with the management of an estate as such, but it's the people themselves in the estate who create the gardens, who look after the refuse and recycling areas, who run clubs, who get together and solve problems as and when they arrive. And for instance, in the Newcastle scheme I showed you, the mailings, there's a very close-knit community there that has developed, and they're very good. They meet regularly. They talk through what the issues are, and they solve them. Be it noise from a local pub, or be it kind of the continuing industrial things going on next door. They find ways of dealing with them. So it's interesting.
I think that's lovely, Robert. I think sometimes on larger projects there's a bit of help needed. So what's lovely is there is actually a caretaker, which is quite unusual on this estate, and honestly that's made all the difference. So people speak to the caretaker. He's a little bit not like a police person, but he's there. He's just keeping a little bit of an eye on things when it gets a bit hectic in the summer in the park. And he talks to residents and gives us feedback. And I think residents do want to get involved now that they've got that community space, that space to gather, that convivial space, and they also get together in the park and they have views. So I'm hoping where there was a definite sort of that's not our job, that there is a shift in attitude now that this change has been made, and I would love that to grow. And I hope the client can maybe encourage that to grow rather than just turning up with the lawnmowers. So that would be lovely. Ownership,
little bit
more
related.
ownership of your space. Yeah.
Sure. A little bit related to that is, Robert, you had some very tight separations between dwellings. How have you found that's actually operated on the ground? And also a question here around how you determined those. You did mention your personal experience, but what sort of generated that 5 metre separation or 12 metre separation wherever you've ended up, and how have they operated?
Yeah, well, the point was, in order to achieve what we were trying to do on that scheme, we had to show that we could create as many homes as we could have done if we'd created a very conventional set of blocks of flats, kind of as it were. So we right from the start, we knew we had to go for close packing of these units. And what we did is, when we did have these sort of 5 metre separation distances, there's only one point where it is 5 metres. Most of the time it's about 12. But where it is 5 metres, what we did is we angled the windows one to another. And you can see, if you have a look on our website at plans of this thing, you can see that the windows angle away from each other and do little clever little maneuvers to kind of avoid direct overlooking. But actually, I mean, what I can say from living here in my mews 7 meters apart from my neighbors, where I look straight into their windows, is that it's actually more of a sort of social etiquette. What happens is that when you meet each other on the street, you kind of interact. But if you happen to catch sight of them through the windows, it's as though they're not there. You ignore it, and that way it's almost like a fictional privacy that you create through a shared culture. And obviously that's not always going to work, but it certainly works here.
I think the distances in an urban setting that have been set are ridiculous. I'm completely with Robert, because all the most successful bits of city are quite intimate. But I heard on a QI, which is a TV show here where they go through facts, that this distance separation was set out by 2 men walking apart from each other until they shouldn't see each other's nipples. And that was set at 21 meters outside London. So that is the funniest fact I've ever heard on separation distances. But
okay. We won't be doing that exercise in class.
No.
Okay, very good. Now look, totally separate topic. Environmental systems. So what environmental systems are workable in affordable housing? I'm talking energy, water, and waste, which you've both mentioned. What's reasonable to provide for the benefit of occupants and the benefit of the planet, obviously? How have you how's your decision making worked on that, and your clients' decision making worked on that front?
I think just the most important thing is to have less kit, and to get the design of the homes, whether that's orientation, dealing with overheating, with positioning of a deep reveal or a balcony or things like that. You want to have less kit. I have been in maybe 15 years ago, or going to an old lady's home to visit her after she'd moved in, and she just opened this cupboard that looked like a spaceship, and she had no idea how to work any of it, so she wasn't using it properly. So it's really important that homes are simple to use, that there's really good handover as well of homes, and that people get like a little handbook or just something, make it all really simple for people to use. I think the usability and what we're learning in post-occupancy evaluation has to come back into that story, because if people aren't, when you get a really complicated machine and you use 2 settings, we're all a bit like that. So we need to make sure that everything we put in isn't overly complicated, and in a way the fundamental design is getting things right before you layer on lots of kit. So yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I really agree about that. And I mean, one of the reasons, well, it's interesting because you're not always, it's not always your primary role to decide on these things, but you can help guide the services engineer and the client towards systems that are going to work for the people who live there. And for instance, in that little project I showed you towards the beginning, where they were kind of very low energy homes, the system set up there, because as you say, if people don't know how to work this stuff, it's just a complete waste of time giving it to them. But there was a kind of iPad type interface that they had in their front wall, on the wall, but they could unclip it and put it on their laps and so on, which controlled the various systems. And there was this very easy to use interface that enabled them to, they didn't have to go up to sort of white boxes and start turning dials and that kind of thing. So yeah, but it's an ongoing discussion, I think. I mean, I've got a smart kind of thermostat, and I don't really know how to work it properly, I must admit.
We've had a little bit of pushback. It's interesting from residents who are used to say gas or using gas, and we are certainly moved away from gas. So that can be a challenging discussion with residents, you know, and just trying to explain how the new energy will work. But what we have found is one of the biggest stresses on residents in affordable housing is their bills. So anything we can do to reduce their bills is incredibly important. Otherwise, people aren't heating, and there's been a lot around mold here. We have problems with mold with some of the housing that hasn't been built properly, but also maybe people can't even afford to heat and ventilate properly. So the really getting everything right so that people don't end up in fuel poverty as well is really important.
Okay. Last question, I'd say. You've both sort of referenced this, but there's a difference between a developer's understanding of what's going to appeal to the market, for want of a better word. It's probably a difference between local authority planners' perception of what's appropriate for a particular demographic, and certainly real estate agents have got a preconception about what's going to sell well. How do you reconcile those conversations with your own research into what people will enjoy in their home?
Well, I mean, estate agents, real estate agents, they basically know what they know, so that they always base their advice on what's worked before, and so they're not very good at thinking outside the box. They're not very good at innovation or different ways of doing things. Clients, I mean, if you can show them that there's something in it for them, they will be very fascinated and interested usually by new ways of doing things. But you know, I think Tricia made the point, and it's really true. You don't get good architecture just from good architects. You get good architecture from a combination of a good architect and a good client. And there's plenty of clients who are stuck in the mud and they just do it my way, you know, and you know you're not going to get very far. You know, you're not going to be able to do something really interesting with them. There are other clients who say, "Go on, surprise me," you know, and that's the way that you get innovation and you get forward movement.
You've definitely attracted some great ones, Robert, looking at your buildings. One thing interesting, just a little anecdote, is that we really like gallery deck, what we call gallery or deck access housing, which is what that older people's housing was. And it really helps with dual aspect. It helps with overheating. You get through ventilation. But we had a project where, right at the end, these agents came in and went, "Can't sell this. Can't sell this. This is a disaster. This is a disaster." And then somebody else went away and changed it all. Now, interestingly, that's complete nonsense, because we have a project in Hackney and Savills were selling them. In fact, two of them bought the flats, and they said it was their fastest selling project. So you just get sometimes these very adamant agents, and they can really skew a client. Like, client's quite fearful then, because they're hearing like, there's no way you can sell that. And we've written about deck access for that reason, because we're passionate about it as a book, because that perception came from the fact it was used a lot in affordable housing. So in terms of private, it had a kind of stigma, which is ridiculous. So you do get this pushback that can be quite challenging at times from from the agents. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumed expertise among people who don't really
Yeah.
understand space very well. I mean, this isn't an example of residential, but it's a retail example. I mean, in Britain, when you talk to retail experts, so-called, they always insist that everything is rectangular and it needs to be sort of big box retail with kind of aisles and all very laid out and so on. And they say, look, you know, we're talking about money here. If you don't do it this way, we lose money. But then you go to somewhere like France, go to Paris, and look at the way supermarkets are laid out there, where they've got much tighter sort of urban controls. And you go in through a tiny little shop front, and then the supermarket opens up in a regular way at the back. And, you know, you can see those supermarkets are doing fine. So you think, what is all this sort of quasi-scientific nonsense we're being told is absolutely true in Britain? It's crazy.
Challenge the
Yes.
brief. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, challenge the brief.
Challenge the brief. I'm not sure if I should encourage that with my students on this project. It might become unmanageable. But look, I think we'll close it there unless either we've got any final observation. No. Okay. Well, look. Go ahead, Trish.
No, just make great affordable housing in Australia. I'm sure you all will. It's needed over the world. So I'd love to, Mark, you have to show us what some of your students are doing in the future.
Yeah,
I will just say, I've sent some.
I will just say, based on my recent visit to Brisbane, I saw some fantastic architecture there, particularly fantastic residential architecture, and so there's a huge amount to learn from there. And I was very inspired.
Well, thank you for that Australian acknowledgement, and thank you, Tricia, for your Australian acknowledgement, inspiring our graduates to come and work in London, as many thousands have done over many years. So look, we'll close it there. Thank you both very much for such inspiring work, and there's so many lessons for the students coming out of what you've presented. And again, accept our thanks and acclamation.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you everybody for attending. We'll close it there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.